Voting has started in Australia in an election that could pave the way for the country to become a republic. 12 million voters are electing a convention which will think deeply about whether they still want the Queen as their head of state. The convention's report will land on the desks of government ministers next February, and there could then be a referendum on the monarchy. From Australia, Michael Peschardt reports.
The opening strains to a campaign which will decide whether the House of Windsor can continue to hold sway over the Australian continent. This is a rally to launch the Loyalist Party ticket.
Here they come, ladies and gentlemen, your candidates for the new convention!
These people make no apology for wrapping themselves in the flag. They're convinced the Republican movement is bent not only on tearing down the monarchy, but also on changing the Australian flag with its Union Jack in the corner.
If this kind of thing was done in the United States, the flag is so important as a symbol of that nation. It glues the citizens together, and I say our flag does too. If it was done there, the people responsible would be up for treason. Absolutely disgraceful, disgusting.
Millions of ballot papers are being printed and sent out to every Australian household. It is an unprecedented election campaign, and one that became inevitable when the then Prime Minister, Paul Keating, kicked off the Republican push, with a hobnailed boot attack on all things British and those Australians still in awe of the so-called mother country.
I learned about self-respect and self-regard for Australia. Not about some cultural cringe to a country which decided not to defend the Malaysian Peninsula, not to worry about Singapore. This was the country that you people wedded yourself to. Even as they walked out on you and joined the common market, you were still looking for your MBEs and your knighthoods and all the rest of the regalia that come with it.
Mr. Keating is not standing as a candidate. Indeed, he's most notable by his absence from a Republican campaign desperately trying to change its image. Rupert Murdoch's influential national newspaper, The Australian, is leading the fight to make republicanism more respectable. It's been running a long-term campaign against the monarchy. In every section of the media, the message these days is more gently put.
Australian children are fortunate to be growing up in a country that values democracy, tolerance and a fair go. But no matter how good they are, they can never become the head of state of their own country. It's time Australia's head of state was one of us. Please stand up and be counted.
The campaign now being fought is to elect half the delegates to a special People's Convention to be held in February. The other 50% of the delegates are being directly appointed by the government. The convention will decide what progress, if any, there should be towards abolishing the monarchy, most particularly whether to hold a full-scale referendum. It is a different sort of patriotism on show within the Republican cause. It was no accident they introduced their convention candidates at the Sydney Opera House, a modern symbol of Australia owing nothing to links with Britain. This is an impressive gathering of the movers and shakers of the top echelon of Australian society. Business leaders, politicians, sporting personalities, and the new rich and famous.
This is something that is about being passionate about the fantastic country that we have here, and that it is time to actually stand up and say, all right, we are a developed, independent nation. We no longer need the apron strings that we had. It doesn't take away from our bond with Britain, but let's move forward. And this opportunity with the new millennium is a historic opportunity for all of us to move forward and really stake our claims in our own future.
Don Bradman, every Aussie dips his lid to you.
But nevertheless, the past remains critical to understanding Australia's complex relationship with Britain and some of the emotional origins of contemporary republicanism. Sport is at the heart of Australian culture, and Don Bradman the ultimate national hero. In the 1930s, England tried to intimidate Bradman's Australia with a deliberate policy of short-pitch bowling. For many of the elder statesmen of the modern Republican movement, it was their defining moment. The relationship with Britain would never be the same again.
I was following the Bodyline series in 1932-1933, and after the fourth test in Adelaide, where two Australian batsmen were hit by Harold Larwood, the famous English fast bowler, a suggestion was made that Australia should secede from the British Empire. Now, obsessed with cricket, I thought that is what we should do, that the English team had been guilty of very unfair play, and that was the beginning and the end of my thought about monarchy or republic at that time.
After the Second World War, there also began a sea change in the country's racial makeup. Hundreds of thousands of refugees from Italy, Greece and Eastern Europe were brought to Australia to populate the vast areas of empty space. A mass migration which has been continued with new arrivals from Asia.
I think the other thing from my perspective and from the perspective of a lot of working people, a lot of people like me came to this country after the Second World War, so we don't have that affinity with British royalty and the British heritage. And for a lot of migrants who are workers, I think the day will finally come when they too can be very proud of our independent national identity.
This is the Wagga Wagga Country Fair in outback New South Wales. It is an unchanging Australian scene. There's no sign of the thousands of migrants who've arrived from Asia during the past 20 years. They've settled in the cities.
And if we replace the Governor-General with a politician, we will just be adding another tier of politics to our existing system.
Garth Leggett and Christine Ferguson are both standing for the monarchist movement. They're campaigning hard, mostly among friends, though their opponents have apparently made inroads even in what is the traditional Conservative heartland.
Do you like some cereal?
I'm a pro-Republic person.
Oh, right. Oh, well, would you like some anyway? Oh, but she looks so nice.
The majority, though, are sympathetic. The monarchists' most powerful weapon is a general sentiment that the status quo works fine as it is, so why the need for change?
The Republic movement itself haven't actually said what is really going to happen, and I think that's the unknown. I think it's the unknown of what might happen. We've been served very well with the constitution we have now, and we'd like to stay with it, I think, and I think that people basically are fearful.
Go back, go back.
The death of Diana, the Princess of Wales, provoked almost as strong a reaction in Wagga Wagga as it did in Britain. The timing of this election has posed a dilemma for the monarchists. Exactly how to treat the issue of the royal family itself. They've decided firmly to exclude personalities from the entire debate.
Diana was a beautiful person, and I don't feel that her loss should in any way enter into constitutional debate at all. Personalities ought to be kept out of it. It is not a question of whether you like or don't like Prince Charles or whatever. It's nothing to do with the actual debate. Members of the British royal family ought to be kept as far away from the debate as possible, I think.
I just need to go off the checklist with you.
At the headquarters of the Australian Republican movement in Sydney, there is mounting frustration at the lack of debate about the crown or who might wear it. It's as if the royal family didn't exist.
This is the dishonesty, if you like, of the monarchist position nowadays. They know that the crown, the British crown, while viewed with great affection by many, if not most Australians, is no longer relevant to Australians. So unable to defend the crown, which after all is what they were established to defend, they turn around and say, well, it's got nothing to do with the crown.
How's things going? Good.
Malcolm Turnbull, barrister turned highly successful merchant banker, is best known in Britain for his advocacy in the spy-catcher trial which greatly embarrassed Lady Thatcher's government. The Republican movement has 8,000 members. This was a fundraising dinner. It's criticised for being filled with the so-called Chardonnay-sipping urban elite.
Well, I mean, talk about elites. The British royal family's pretty elite. You see, our opponents, what they're saying to the Australian people, they're looking 18 million people in the eye and they're saying to them, not one of you is good enough to be head of state of your own country. Not one of you is good enough. Only a member of an aristocratic English family is good enough.
The early signs are that the Republican argument is gathering momentum. Some polls suggest support for the monarchy has fallen to 30%, a marked drop in recent months. But loyalists are not disheartened. They're convinced the campaign will expose the fundamental flaw in the Republican rhetoric, and one that would inevitably surface if the debate ever travelled this far in Britain. The Queen in Australia, through her representative, the Governor-General, has more or less the same powers she has in Britain, a great many and at the same time practically none. In theory, the monarch has dictatorial powers to open parliaments and dismiss governments, but conventions effectively constrain the crown. According to the monarchists, installing a president as a straight replacement isn't possible without other changes to the constitution. It's hard for voters to make a judgment when two former Chief Justices take diametrically opposing views.
If the Constitution simply gave to the President the existing powers of the Governor-General, the President would be in the position of a dictator. And that situation, of course, would have to be guarded against. But it's by no means easy to devise an effective and workable system to take the place of the present one in that respect.
That's an exaggeration. It is to the interests of supporters of the monarchy to emphasise and exaggerate legal difficulties, particularly constitutional legal difficulties, with a view to making them appear to be so complex and complicated as to amount to a serious obstacle in the way of a transformation to a republic. But I don't think those difficulties exist in the way that the monarchists suggest that they do.
The loyalists, though, remain resolute. The T-shirt's an attempt, not entirely successful, to shake off their old-fashioned image. A republic is probably inevitable one day, but it's by no means a certainty quite yet.